Okay, so we are week 7 already. Amazing. So this is actually our final topic that we're dealing with, because next week I left open for topics that you all want to just come with. So be thinking, and those that couldn't be here tonight, watch the video, be thinking about maybe questions or a particular cultural, social issue that we didn't deal with that you want to talk about, and we'll just tackle it, sort of offhand next week. And we might end early if there's not a lot, we'll end early and be done. But I wanted to do that because I know, obviously, there's many, many issues, and we can only deal with a limited number. Plus, there are questions that come up and course of discussion afterwards and things. I want to be sure to have plenty of opportunity to deal with those. So tonight we're going to, last week we dealt with the, what is Christian nationalism, right? So I heard some feedback on that, which I kind of felt like I was rambling and kind of getting a little off base there and everything, but then I heard some people, that was so good, that was really good, really good. I think it maybe hit a spot for people, right? Because that is one of the hot button issues that we as Christians have to deal with, is how to relate with our government, our country, difference between patriotism and that radical kind of Christian nationalism that I mentioned, and finding what really is the appropriate Christian position there based on God's word. And so that was last week, and this week we're going to deal with anger, violence, self-defense, and Christian gentleness. So you probably notice in all of these there's a spectrum of positions or kind of perspectives that we can take on these issues. And what we're searching for, right, is that the biblical perspective. And you will find, and I'll kind of lay this out, and you tell me if this resonates or if you've heard this. It is kind of trendy right now amongst conservative, evangelical Christians, many of whom kind of would fall in almost that Christian nationalism space that we talked about last week, who like to say, the Bible does not tell us that we got to be nice. Christians aren't, we're not told to be nice. And we need to stop being, so nice and letting people run over us, and they kind of come with the attitude that we need to be much more aggressive in the culture wars. Often that comes to along with a strong sense of and we're allowed to, not only are we allowed to, we're obligated to protect. We're to be sheepdogs. We're to be sheepdogs among and protect the sheep from the wolves. And we Christians need to stop being sheep. Okay, so have you heard some of that kind of talk? Maybe it's only people I hang with. I don't know, but that's yes.
Where does it say that in the scripture?
Well,
they're taking things out of context
yeah.
to support their own ideology.
Yeah. So that's the question, right? That we've got, because that is a popular and maybe a growing kind of thought. And of course, those who would say those things would point to things like Nazi Germany, where Christians just, the perception is Christians just kind of rolled over and allowed the Jews to be murdered and didn't stand up and say anything, or didn't resist. whereas we should resist. I mentioned last week how I talked to Christians, some personally, who not sort of figuratively and sort of, just kind of venting, but actually thought that they should take up arms and march on the Capitol back in January 6, 2021.
So part of what I would say that I feel like I've kind of gotten a take on from some friends as we speak and things like that is that people are tired of being what they feel stepped on and walked on, Christian people, and that we've just been, it just continues to get, and so now they're to this point where they're ready to stand up. And if that makes sense what I'm saying, I just think that's kind of...
That's right. I think you're right.
They were quiet and they were meek and they felt like it just continues to go down this hill, this road that we're being... stomped on in every way, and so that's the take I would say.
And I think that's right. And I think what's happened is the culture used to be very, very Christian friendly, and our society was very accommodating and deferential to Christianity for actually centuries, from the founding up until, 50, 60, 70 years ago, whatever. You could really tell, I'm not that old, but, there's things that happened in the culture, a couple of court cases and some things that began to happen, and things began to slowly change. And then, of course, in the 60s, with what really is our cultural revolution in America, with the sexual revolution and all that happened in the 60s, really accelerated, began to change things. And so now we've gotten to a point where you could say, and who knows exactly when it happened, but we've gone over that, there's been a tipping point. Now our society is probably hostile toward Christianity. Not even neutral. I think it's moved. I think it probably progressed from very favorable, deferential, accommodating, neutral, questioning. Now it's moved into the hostility. Now, I'm not saying persecution in the sense that a lot of Christians in the world suffer, but there is definitely a hostility, a bias against Christianity in our society, in America. Very new territory for us. And so, to your point, we have this Christians, some among us, and it's legitimate. It's why we're dealing with this topic, to say we should be sheepdogs. Meekness does not mean weakness. A lot of you'll hear these phrases, and we're not told to be nice, and all that, right? The question really is, what's the biblical? Just like everything else we've been dealing with, what's our biblical? Because we need to think through this. We need to know how we are to present ourselves and respond in our culture. And the good thing is, in Scripture, in the New Testament, especially from Acts on, they were also in a very hostile culture, much more hostile than we are. And so it's very, very educational to take a good, honest look at how the New Testament church handled themselves. Why? But we're going to look at, like all the others, we're going to look at the narrative and see. That's how you do. When you look in the New Testament, what you find is you find Christians from the book of Acts on. You find Christians taking the doctrine and theology of Jesus, which is the fulfillment of the doctrine and theology of the Old Testament, and applying it, which is exactly what we need to do. And so that's why we go back to the biblical narrative, the Old Testament. We look at the foundation of this stuff, and then we see Jesus taking that. And as he personally said, I didn't come to set aside any of that, do away with any of that. I came to fulfill it and complete it. And then you see the New Testament church saying, okay, this is how we live it, which is where we're at. We're in the same phase as the Christians from Acts to Revelation were in. How do we live the way? Remember, the way. It's a different way. Well, how do you do that? I mean, and that's legitimate. And the answer is we do it not how culture says, not how our society and our culture says we ought to live, but the way that Jesus teaches, and that's our goal, to figure that out. So, starting with, like we have done, we need to look at this, and that we see that the foundation of this starts in the beginning. That when God created the world, and this is very important, before the fall, there was no violence. There was none of that. There was no, physical killing of animals to eat. I mean, you see that switch. Then the fall happens, and the first death occurs in the hides to cover Adam and Eve. And then, whereas they were told to eat of all the plants and stuff before, now they're told to kill and eat. I mean, violence and all this begins with the fall, not how God intended it. This is very important to keep that in mind. And then we see in Genesis, and again, I got these scriptures here. There's a lot more we could put, and I bolded a few to really key in on. But I'm going to reference, especially since we started late, in order to get it all in, I'm probably only going to read a couple. But then in Genesis 6, we see where God looks down and says, the wickedness and the violence of the human race is just grown exponentially. And his judgment comes. His righteous judgment comes, wipes them off of the planet, starts over, basically. So, again, that's really highlighting this fact that, violence and wrath and this anger, we see it happening, and it grows exponentially. God's wrath comes before his righteous judgment comes because of it. And he kind of hits the reset button. Then, as he delivers the law in Exodus chapter 21 that I listed here, we see that there is punishment in the law for violence. Not just murder, not just what we would think of as murder and premeditated murder, but two men get in a scuffle. One of them gets accidentally hurt. That's wrong. That's bad. There's punishment for that. If one of them gets killed, if it isn't premeditated, all right, well, this guy can go to one of these, towns I'll set aside and wait for. But no matter what the scenario, if someone gets hurt and killed because of argument, because of some kind of conflict, it's not good. And there's punishment. But there's acknowledgement that it's different, right? It's different to have a premeditated murder of someone who's innocent versus a scuffle, an argument, a disagreement, a conflict like that. Then in the First Chronicles passage, this is very interesting. So again, we're following how that we see that this idea of violence, physical violence and wrath and anger is part of sin and part of the fallen world, not part of God's initial plan at all. And then in 1 Chronicles, David desires to build the Lord's temple. This is so interesting. He desires to build the Lord's temple. And God basically tells him, and this incident is related in several passages in the Old Testament. But God basically tells him through the prophet, David, your heart is right. Basically, it is good that in your heart you want to build me a temple. That's good. But you're not going to do it because your hands have shed much blood. And yet David did the bloodshedding in obedience to God in many, many of those cases to protect his people, to take the land, to suppress the enemy. And now David's love for God, he wants to build a temple. And God's, no, your hands are bloody. Wow. That's very, very instructive. The model king, a man after God's own heart, one who did God's will in conquering Israel's enemies, yet God didn't want him to build the temple because he had so much blood on his hands. This tells us a lot. That the world is fallen and broken because of sin, and things have to be done. Remember, we talked multiple times about Romans 13 and about how God puts governing authorities over us and gives them the power of the sword. Paul says they don't wield the sword in vain. They are God's ministers to suppress evil and to reward the good. And the sword is one of their tools. Obvious meaning, to execute judgment, war, those things. But that's because the world is fallen and broken and sin runs amok. And David was God's minister and representative, the model king, doing what needed to be done. And yet, God's like, no, your hands are very bloody. Your son will build the temple. So we need to keep this in mind as we go through this, and then we come to say, okay, now what is the biblical perspective around violence, anger, violence, self-defense, Christian gentleness? We see from David in that whole incident there that a righteous man may still find himself in situations in which he has to do violence to stand against evil or protect his people, but it is never a good and desirable thing. It might be a necessary thing, but it's not good and not desirable. It's still a result of sin, even when the righteous man's own heart is right and pure before God. So, in some way, all of the blood that David spilled, even though it was done as a necessary thing, as a thing even within God's will in some sense, still polluted David to the point where he was not allowed to build the temple. And it just is. All right. Then, just as to sort of flesh that out, in the book of Proverbs, which much of the Proverbs we believe is written by Solomon, so David's son, right? We find that the wicked man is characterized by wrath, anger, and violence. The righteous man is not. Then we move on into the New Testament. Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. We see that what the Sermon on the Mount is a description of the children of the kingdom. This is how you are. This is how you are to be. This is your heart attitude and your way of being as a child of the kingdom from the Sermon on the Mount. That people of his kingdom love peace. Peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. They accept wrongs and persecution in his name without resorting to violence. Blessed are you when you are reviled and persecuted for my name's sake. I mean, that's literally what Jesus said, right? So taking, and you can see how, and following the narrative of Scripture, how that all aligns and perfectly fits. Prior to the fall, no violence, no outbursting of wrath, no physical killing and violence. Sin enters the world falls, things begin to decay, that happens and that grows exponentially. Even David, in doing what needed to be done, is somehow polluted by it and can't build the temple. The Proverbs paint the picture of the wicked man being a man of anger and wrath and violence, and the righteous man is not. And Jesus then says, look, this is how you want to be in the kingdom. You want to be a kingdom person. This is how you are to be. Then Paul tells us in Romans chapter 1, that the wickedness and violence is part of what has characterized the people who reject God in their knowledge. They don't want God. They don't want anything to do with God. They turned away from him, and wickedness and violence is part of that, what it really holds sway there. And then I'm going to read in in 1 Timothy 1 through 3, as Paul instructs his protege, Timothy. He tells Timothy in chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. I'm sorry. I think it's, 1 Timothy 1 through 3. Let's see. Maybe that was wrong. I wrote that down wrong. Let's see. Oh, I think maybe it was 3, 1 through 3. So he's telling Timothy about elders or bishops, depending on. I'm looking at the original King James that John the Baptist read, and it says, "This is a true saying: if a man desires the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of but one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker." That's a old way of saying, not doing violence, not prone to violence, but striker, someone who hits other people. No striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, just a brawler, and not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. So, Paul's perspective on a pastor, elder, bishop, all the same office there, is that he must be a kind of a supreme example of a kingdom person, of a follower of Christ. And so he elevates that, takes this idea of violence, being a brawler, striker, being violent and anger, wrathful, no place at all in the life of the pastor, elder, or deacon. Later on, he talks about that with deacons as well. But just so we don't think that it's only for pastors and elders, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, Ephesians 4, 1 and 2, this Bible is so new, the pages are still kind of stuck. Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Yeah, sorry. Chapter 3 and 4 is just stuck. That's all I'm telling you, right there. Hopefully the person who... okay, it didn't rip. Says, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling. Somebody who has that in a more modern English translation, want to read that? Okay.
This is the New King James.
Yeah.
It says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling.
So lowliness and gentleness, meekness, this is how we walk worthy of our calling. Yes?
What does that word long-suffering mean?
Patient.
Is it patient?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It means patient. And in the context there, which that's really, I'm glad you brought that up, because in that context, what he's saying is, in the church, now, we're going to irritate one another from time to time. We're going to hurt one another's feelings from time to time. We're going to be jerks toward one another from time to time. None of that justifies getting wrathful and violent, we are to be long-suffering. That's a great old word. Think about that. I suffer long with you. I'm suffering long with you. It's patience. And, and also, okay, you can actually the Greek word in the Greek for kindness, which is not in that passage, but kindness can legitimately be translated as nice. Although I think the English, when we think of nice, we often think, oh, they're nice maybe just on the surface. They can be nice, right? But down and that wouldn't fit. But this idea of meekness and lowliness is you're humble. And Chris, you brought up about us not wanting, we're being tread on. Don't tread on me. That sign, right? Don't tread on me. And we're tired of being walked on. Well, I mean, we're kind of being told to let people walk on you if that's what it is. I mean, now, and now on the other hand, it's like, well, that kind of depends on what you mean. Does it mean, you don't have to let people take advantage of you? Well, I don't know. If they ask for your coat, give them your shirt too, right? I mean, there's much of our modern American Christianity that is just not aligned with the way, and we just gotta acknowledge that. We just gotta acknowledge that. I mean, we are called to be long suffering, to be considered blessed when we are persecuted, when we're reviled for His name's sake. Isn't that what it means when we say Christianity is now looked upon unfavorably and we're kind of hostile toward Christianity now. Yes, we're being reviled. Well, count it blessed, And
I think there's a temptation for us just to be silent because we
because of that.
because our Christian values are so inconsistent with the values of the world, and I mean it is confrontational. Even if you're trying to speak in gentleness and kindness.
Oh, absolutely. You're right.
It disrupts their agenda.
Very much.
And so there's this
yeah.
clash between these.
And see, here's where what you said there is right on. And one of the reasons that we want to be biblical about this, because what we don't want to happen is we don't want our reactions and flesh, if you will, to obscure the message, the gospel, and the glory of Christ. Because the message, the gospel, Christ, is offensive himself. And if we're faithful in presenting the gospel and presenting Jesus as he really is, it's going to rile people up. It's going to cause confrontation. That's exactly what we see in the New Testament. Jesus was crucified. All the apostles basically were martyred. It does, but but in the midst of that, how did they act? How did they present themselves? Paul went so far to tell the Corinthians, you should just be wronged rather than sue each other. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I'm paraphrasing. But he says, I can't believe what I'm hearing. I hear you guys are suing each other in courts. They're not even believers. Don't you realize you're going to be ruling and judging over angels in the new heavens and new earth? And you take your disputes to the courts? You should just be wronged. Wow. I don't think Paul would be too favorably accepted amongst many modern American Christians. And so, by living the Sermon on the Mount, we will absolutely, you're right, we will, by virtue of that, and by preaching the truth and speaking the truth, we're going to upset people. People will get, they'll be offended, right? But our job is to be biblical in the way we do things and the way we respond, and so that we don't become the issue and that we aren't detracting from the gospel. And so that's where I think our real challenge is okay, I'm offensive. Is it because of I said it in a hateful... how many of you know the name and or have heard Paul Washer preach or teach or speak? Okay. So I know him not well, but I do know him personally. I had him in at Bloomsdale for revival one time, and but before I had him there, I attended a conference and heard him preach at his church in Illinois when he was still here. He's now down in Alabama or something for Heart Cry Missionary Society, but it was like a pastor's conference. And so I was there and he was preaching, and and he preaches hardcore, very, you'll have nubs for toes when he's done, usually. But, and when he was preaching on this particular day, it was like a two or 3 day conference, I actually felt like, wow, he's angry. He's angry. So, go on, conference. Next day, come in. So before everything gets started, he stood up. He apologized and asked for forgiveness from everybody for the day before. He said, look, I was angry. And I was, he goes, it was from the flesh. I was, angry and irritated, and it was from the flesh, and never do we want to be offensive from our flesh and allow that to be the offense. The gospel is the offense enough, the truth of God's word, and we don't need to try to make it more offensive by delivering it with anger and vitriol or vengeance and all that, right? Now, we're all humans, and sometimes that's going to happen, but point is that we've got to really guard against that, because it can definitely happen. And then all of a sudden, Paul Washer, Bruce Clark, whomever, becomes the problem, and the gospel message is not even heard because we've become, the issue. So, that's kind of our goal, is to not allow that to happen. Okay, so Paul, though, here tells us how to behave toward each other. James, very instructive, what James has to say here. And he's talking to a church, right? James chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Listen to this. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain, ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because you ask not. So, this fighting and warring and all, coming from the lusts of our heart, we have not because we're not showing dependence on God. And even when we're, let's say, fighting culture wars, or when we're trying to stand for truth, if we trust God and really believe that His word will go forth and accomplish His purposes and will not return void, we don't need to get all angry and nasty with people, right? And so I think James is certainly tapping into that. Okay. In light of the overall biblical narrative and the clear individual passages we've looked at, and there's a bunch more we could have, I think we can conclude these things that can guide us on how to deal with this topic in our society or any society. In our society, let me just say this though, it's a little different than in many others. If we were living in lots of other societies, you would not have the option to, let's just say, to own a firearm. You would not have an option, certainly, in lots of places, to carry a firearm. That's a pretty unique. Or any other weapon. There are places that, you can't have just weapon. Anything can be a weapon. I get that, right? But so this idea in our culture, in our society, deeply, deeply embedded the right to bear arms. So this is especially important for Christians. I said this one time, and I thought I was pretty sure the person I was talking to felt like I was a true heretic when I said, because we were discussing the issue, and I said, the biblical way and perspective of how that we need to behave is more important than the Second Amendment. It shouldn't even be a controversial statement for a Christian. Now, I'm not saying that we can't enjoy the rights of the Second Amendment and be a Christian. I'm just saying that the love for self-defense, Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to revolt. Our country was started that way. All of that is very cherished. So we've got to be very, very careful not to allow that to dictate us versus the Scriptures. Right? Now, here's what I think Scriptures teach in light of everything we just looked at. First, Wrath and violence are a result of sin in the fallen world and not what God intended from the beginning, period. So no matter what lipstick you put on violence, it's not good. It's not part of what God intended. It won't be part of the new heavens and new earth. It wasn't part of the Garden of Eden. It's in the fallen world. Thing that you got to remember. As such, violence is never a good thing. It might be, in a particular situation, better than the alternative. What's an example of scriptures and stuff we've talked about? So what's an example of that? That it wasn't good, obviously, turns out, but it was better than the alternative in this situation. David. He did a lot of violence. Lots of violence. And granted, some of that, or a lot of it, was when he was king. So you could say, oh, well, that's government. Some of it was before he was king. So, because some Christians say, only the government, Romans 13, only the government bears the sword. So individual Christians, we should never resort to violence. I think I shared with you in here, I can't remember if I said the name of the person, but a very highly respected teacher that I do respect and probably agree 99% with him. But he says if someone broke into his house and were raping and killing his wife and children, he would not resist with violence. I think that's wrong. He, though, trying to be biblical and all through and through, believes that's the case. One justification for that is, you see all this violence in the New Old Testament, it's from the government. From Israel was a theocracy, but they had kings and they were told and they did this. But David did plenty of violence prior to being king as well. But it was not good. He couldn't build the temple. But it was better than the alternative. Could have allowed the Philistines to run amok and take the land from Israel, God's promised land from Israel, and kill the women and children and people in Israel. But no, so it's never a good thing, but it might be better than the alternative, because we live in a fallen world in which sin runs amok, and those kind of things sometimes have to happen. There's decisions there. We see that with David. We see that in Romans 13 when Paul is talking about the government, but he says they don't bear the sword in vain. They will execute. They will do violence, and that's appropriate under those circumstances. Not good, but better than the alternative. Thirdly, a man or a woman of God is not to be characterized by wrath and violence, outbursts of anger and violence. It's just not. That's clear. Rather, a man or woman of God is to be known for gentleness, meekness, kindness, and be a peacemaker. Okay, we could quibble over the word nice. That's really not the point, nice. But gentle, kind. Most of the time when you think someone's kind, they're also nice. So, but, meek and lowly. And we've already talked about counting it a blessing when we're persecuted and reviled for the name of Christ. That's what characterizes us. War, as seen in the Old Testament, may sometimes be necessary, but is never a good thing. I was talking earlier more on an individual basis, King David, but now war in terms of government, it's an unfortunate accommodation to sin and the fallen state of the world. St. Augustine, back in the 5th century, is widely credited with sort of developing, at least, if not coming up with, but developing the concept of just war. Have you ever heard of the just war theory? So that's actually starting with Augustine, or at least developing and introducing once the church became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and the church and the empire basically merged, or certainly became extremely intertwined. All of a sudden, the church found herself in this situation where, wait a second, the emperor wants our blessing to go like conquer people. Or and so Augustine, being the preeminent theologian of the day and probably one of the greatest theologians of the church throughout all of church history, put his mind and heart to understanding this issue and came up with the just war theory as a guideline for the Roman authorities to guide whether or not using the sword was justified. And so, again, it's never a good thing, but it might be justified. It's never a good thing, but it may be better than the alternative. So you might make a case for, let's just, World War II. How many millions of people were killed in that war? And so it was not good. None of that was good. Nowadays we talk about, we carpet bombed civilians in World War II. People say, we didn't have the precise munitions to target just the military installations, right? Well, whatever. We targeted and bombed civilians, did a lot of things in that war. But most people will admit to stop the Nazis, it was justified, right? That's the just war theory. And then, of course, there would be an argument, a big argument, whether or were we justified in Vietnam or not, right? That was a huge argument there. Still is. We won't tackle that. But that just illustrates this whole concept of the just war theory. Whereas you see ample justification for what we did in World War II to stop. Now, there is one thing. What's one thing that's still hotly debated that whether we should have done it, should not have done it in World War II? Yeah. So there you go, right? Should we have dropped the atom bomb? Should we not? Should we have put a bunch more American soldiers in the meat grinder to save a lot of civilians? Or not? But point is, this idea of saying, look, war is not good, violence is not good, killing is not good, but it might, under some circumstances and situations, be necessary and better than the alternative. And that's actually a Christian, based on Christian theology, based on scriptures, just what we walked through tonight, and was introduced to the world by us. And now, you can talk about, everybody talk Geneva Convention, this and that and everything. That's all based on Christian just war theory. So when you see other countries who just disregard that altogether. I think I might have said this in here. When we, in Operation Desert Storm, we rolled in from Kuwait into Iraq and marched right up to Baghdad, and Saddam Hussein's soldiers just threw down their arms and we just rolled over them. And they gave up like crazy. And they intentionally sought out American GIs to surrender to, because of our reputation of mercy. And they did not they knew they'd be killed by their own commanders and stuff for giving up. So they didn't run back to Baghdad. They ran to the American soldier. So that is a kind of a portrait of what we're trying to get at here. When we have a biblical perspective, we can, U.S. military can prepare for war and be the elite, best military in the world, but we don't want to ever use it. That's kind of the thing. Okay. So, can a individual person, do violence to protect himself or his family and still be an obedient follower of Christ? Now, I believe from everything that we find from Scripture, the answer is yes, with a lot of caveats. as long as his or her heart is right, not desiring the violence or vengeance, and is broken over the fact that violence was required at all, and knows that everything possible was done to avoid it. So, I've had pushback from some Christians who are very big into self-defense and military and all that, and say, well, if it makes you feel better that you feel that way and that you can have that feeling, okay. But, well, here's the thing. Jesus is all about your heart. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say, you lust after her. It don't matter. You've committed adultery. What's in here absolutely matters. So if you train, and by the way, I probably should have said this first, I have a concealed carry license. I do concealed carry. And thankfully, I've never had to use it. I did tell, I think it's maybe in here, I told a story where at home one time I thought someone was breaking in the front door, and I found myself on one knee with the gun going just on the verge of shooting through the door. I'm willing, I think. I feel like, or think I am, if that happens, it would be the worst day of my life if I had to take a life. It'd be horrible. I don't ever want to do that. But is it okay for a Christian to do that if necessary? Yes, if your heart is right. Then I think it is one of those situations where in the fallen world, it's horrible, but it's better than the alternative. Because I think that's better than allowing someone to break into your house, kill and murder, rape, whatever, your family. That's just not acceptable, in my opinion.
It comes down to what you wrote earlier. The condition of your heart, whether or not you have malice.
Right. And that's why I pointed out in Exodus, right? There was different punishments. None of it was good. Somebody died. But if there was malice and premeditation, then the punishment was death. I mean, it's so clearly God accommodates for that in the law. And yes, we can still be kingdom children per the Sermon on the Mount. And if God sees fit to keep us from evil to the point we never have to pull a trigger, and I have been in physical fist fights, never have to, not after I got past 17, but never have to hurt another human being, then that's what we pray for, hope for. But if we have to, our heart is right like that, that we're not looking for it, right? And I'm telling you, there's a big temptation. You get into, again, I like guns, I like to hunt, I have guns, I have multiple guns, probably too many guns, but anyway, that's a different thing. And there's a temptation to be drawn to that, to kind of like. I have talked to people who kind of hope they get into a situation. Like, you don't understand. You're taking the life of an image bearer. Don't hope that ever, right? So that's what I'm saying. We have
I guess
to.
if you put all that money in those firearms or those guns, you need to get your money.
Well, yeah, that's where the deer come in, right? So I gotta go after the deer and squirrels. Too many squirrels.
I didn't say that.
But no, and I see, if you ever watch, I don't know if you're on like Facebook or whatever, and you get Jefferson County Sheriff's page, and they'll post something typical like, we got pictures here of these guys running around trying to break into cars in the Festus area or wherever. Just look at the comments. I hope they try it. My Winchester's just itching. I mean, and you just a comment after. Okay, I mean, but all right. So, God forbid that any of us have that attitude. That's what I'm saying. The appropriate picture of the Christian is one of a reluctant warrior, the grieving victor, if we ever have to be called into that situation. Is there no other way? Can we not work this out? I'll do anything to avoid this. But in the end, to protect innocent life, violence is employed, and now I'm deeply grieved over its use. I mean, I had a family member that I just was concerned. So I said to this family member, I said, all right, so what would you do? You look out your window and there's somebody breaking into your car. It's parked on the street, where they lived at the time. That was happening around them. I said, well, what would you do? Well, I'd shoot them. So after I got done talking to him, it's like, oh, yeah, I wouldn't. I guess I wouldn't. No, you don't. Let them break into your car. I mean, in fact, you might not even want to go out and confront them, because then you might have to shoot them. Right? If they got a gun and they pull it on you, and So, I mean, you just got to think about that, right?
I was going to say, most people that are like that have never been in a situation, and they're running their mouth because
Right.
they think they can.
Right.
The problem is when people like that go into a situation and instantly pull out their gun because
Yeah.
they don't know to do anything else.
Right.
That's the person. Anybody come up, you don't want to shoot people.
Yeah.
Anybody come up, now you brought a gun into the situation.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And that goes, for anybody. You
Well,
never pull your gun out.
I had the best story I have about that, and then we'll shut her down, is that I went down and spent a full Saturday with Asymmetric Solutions doing combat pistol training. Awesome. It was a Father's Day gift from my girls. So it was fantastic. I loved it. And the main instructor, we had 3 instructors for my group, and the primary guy was former Army. Oh, no, former, there was an Army, a Delta Force guy, but the primary guy was CIA Special Ops. And so at lunch, we're all standing around talking, right? And hearing stories from these guys. There was one of the instructors was a professional shooter. Other guy was Delta Force, had just come back from being on protective detail with Taylor Swift's worldwide tour at the time. His job was protecting her mom. Her mom stayed at a hotel in France, in Paris, while she flew from there all to her venues. And he had just gotten back. And then the CIA Special Ops guy, who was our primary guy. And so he got out of it because then down at Asymmetric, they still have to stay active in some capacity, like paid protection detail and stuff like that. They have to stay active, but they don't have to be inactive in the military. So he got out of the military, or CIA, he said, because he had a baby girl. And I'm like, yeah, I know how that feels. Yeah, I get you. And he said, so let me tell you something, guys. You want to know what I would do if I walk into a convenience store and I'm in there getting a fountain soda and somebody bursts through the front door with a gun and a mask and they're like, let me tell you how I handle it. I sneak out the back. So here's a dude that's true bad to the bone kind of guy. Yeah, sneaking out the back. Now, you might make a different decision. Oh, there's innocent people or whatever. But his point was, man, you avoid it at all costs. But if you can't, you better know how to do it right. So I think that I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but I think that's kind of the attitude. Man, we got to do whatever we can to avoid it, but sometimes you can't. All right. Well, how about we hold questions about this until next week, because we'll have a whole class for questions, follow-up, stuff like that. All right, everybody's dismissed. Thanks, everybody.